I think saying this wine's organic, to my guest, I don't necessarily need to see that, and sometimes I don't even need to show it on the label. And I tell them how beautiful the wine is and how pure the wine is, and that is represented because of sustainable and responsible practices in the vineyard. That really sells. So Napa Valley, for example, Pride is a spectacular producer, Pride Mountain Vineyards. Now, they don't have much labeling on talking about sustainability at all, but they are so high up. They are touching the sun on Sonoma and Napa County lines.
Hey guys, this is Sid Patel, CEO of USA Wine Ratings and Beverage Trade Network. We are here in one Michelin-star restaurant, one of the finest restaurants, out here in San Francisco area. I'm here with Michael Hoefling, one of the top sommeliers of USA, and we're going to talk about a very interesting and current topic, which is sustainability. This is something which I really want to talk about, and Michael is very passionate about this as well. And what we're going to jam about is really, there is the talk happening at the winemakers level, the growers level, but what does hospitality, what do the buyers want? How can they translate that into storytelling their guests, their consumers, and more importantly, how can it be a profitable rollout as well for all of you, involved in the trade? So let's start with defining what sustainability means to you. Not the grower, but how do you see sustainability?
As a buyer and as someone who advocates for really the growers and the wineries, not just regionally, but I guess globally, sustainability means it's a full package. Because we talk about the farming all the time, and sometimes it's even a subject that needs digestion for the consumer and even for self, right? You're really trying to understand what's going on behind a production. But at the same time, we're the face of ordering things, the cardboard, the glass, the consumption, what we do with all of that waste. So that's a bigger topic of what really sustainability is. I think from a winery perspective, you're talking like in two separate channels. One on the farming. So we're talking about what you are growing within the vineyard, near the vineyard, what you're using within that. So do you have chemicals? Sometimes you might need those. There's certain viruses in France that are happening right now. And for example, there's a producer in Burgundy that just got fined 30,000 euro because they did not spray for this new disease that could ultimately affect the whole region. So there's a question of, you want to be sustainable, but you also have to think about your neighbor. I know a lot of producers in Sonoma County and Napa County, et cetera, locally to San Francisco, even Santa Cruz Mountains, that have been doing organic farming, even biodynamic farming, which is kind of an extension. And you got to understand, a lot of producers, really responsible producers, are doing organic farming and without the use of pesticides and chemicals, but there's a difference between, we've been practicing this for 15 years and we just got our certification, because certifications often take 3 years to get. In Europe, there's a regional one, there's a French one, there's a European Union one. So there's different, and that's why it gets confusing for the consumer as well. So when talking about sustainability, you don't always see it on the package. And as someone who sells these wines to consumers who consume them, sometimes that's a conversation and sometimes that's not. But it's great to always tell the story, to really tell where the wine is from, why it's so beautiful and how much went into the vineyard to make it that beautiful. And sometimes that's being shown on the label and it's not. So Napa Valley, for example, Pride is a spectacular producer, Pride Mountain Vineyards. Now, they don't have much labeling on talking about sustainability at all, but they are so high up. They are touching the sun on Sonoma and Napa County lines. They are exposed to all of the risks that vines normally are exposed to, but they are essentially very responsible in their farming practices and what goes behind them. And you can taste how beautiful the juice, the wine, how plush they are. And they really have the real estate to kind of manage that in a responsible way. and they are not surrounded by any chemical means. So it's really great. Very standard packaging that's beautiful, and I think low impact.
What are the 3 or 4 things that matter to your guest?
I think saying this wine's organic, to my guest, I don't necessarily need to see that, and sometimes I don't even need to show it on the label. And I tell them how beautiful the wine is and how pure the wine is, and that is represented because of sustainable and responsible practices in the vineyard. That really sells.
Understood.
Because when you're looking for nice wine, sometimes, there's wine that's made more for retail, so that is packaged in a way to really inform somebody. But when you're in a restaurant, some of that packaging seems gimmicky. Does that make sense?
Yes. Like when it looks like organic packaging, plus the logos are there of the USDA, FDA.
And you're like, great. But you don't need to see that in a restaurant because, when they're picking through selections, telling them, Ted Lemon from Literai in Sonoma is kind of a pioneer of biodynamics. His wines are pure. You really taste the grape. And he's been sourcing even from Hirsch vineyards for many of years. And his little rows influenced them to change their whole farming. And it's one person influencing, and it kind of grows to the greater, like Sonoma County, for example. And the one thing about organics is you can have an amazing vineyard, but if you're trying to get certified, you can't do it if your neighbor's not doing it.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. In some respects.
In some way, yeah.
In some respects.
The region has to be on board a little bit for that.
Yeah, I'm not talking about like crazy chemicals, but if there's a completely different operation next door, that carries over into your vineyard. So as much as you want to practice and be responsible and sustainable, everybody kind of has to be on board. But that happens slowly. One vineyard that has an impact will slowly kind of influence everyone around them. And I see that globally. So I think we do see that without knowing it. It just happens really slowly. I just went to Bordeaux, a big wine region. 20% of all of French wine within France is all from Bordeaux. And we think about the classified gross, these great wineries, but honestly, there's thousands of producers. And I was so surprised on not only their level of devotion to farming, organics, et cetera, sustainable, how many more things they have on their property beyond vines to just influence the ecology of the area, how many wild birds and flowers are growing. And you talk to them and they've been doing it for actually a long time. But it's also, you realize the people you're talking to have money, and not everyone globally has that kind of resource to devote.
So let me give you a case where a supplier is walking in, right? And then they have their sustainable wines, and we know that it's a broader topic. It can be organic, it can be sustainable packaging. There are many ways you can be sustainable. You can maybe donate as well, and keep doing your stuff. Pitching the basic stuff like the program, the price, all that normal stuff, like all of the brands. It's better to just put information out there as an additional thing that, hey, we do this as well.
Yes, because
so it's a hard sell is not required because you just softly just put it there.
Yeah, if you go into a vineyard and have this conversation with the person behind the vineyard, you're going to spend an hour with them and they're going to talk to you about so many things. And then, so this conversation is, how does that person or how does that brand talk about all of that they're doing, they put so much work into, and it's almost like an elevator speech where can we talk about this in 1 minute? And it's that's hard to, because then you start to hear the same information over and over. We have cover crops and, how we manage our vines and how we manage our soil and and then also the part of sustainability could be in the winery. How are you capturing emissions? How are you space management, and what do you do with your waste? Does all of the skins turn into a compost that then goes back into the vineyard? That's actually information I don't need to know to actually buy your wine. It's fascinating to me, but when I buy the wine, I want to taste it. I want to know the price. It's hard for new regions to break out. I think really kind of classic regions have a benefit in the market. So if it's like a new organic winery that I don't know about, but it's in a region that I've been supporting, then that's kind of how they have a chance to begin with.
Let's go on the restaurant side, right? What do you do to become sustainable if you are a restaurant? And maybe there is a way wineries can help and contribute in that sort of program, if there is. Yeah,
absolutely. I think to answer the last part, it really comes down to packaging. But in a restaurant like this one in California, it's no news to us. We love local, we love organic, etc. Farm to table has really kind of started here 40 plus years ago. But local technically means within 100 miles. So we're talking about getting stuff from Marin, Sonoma County, Napa. Believe me, there's a lot of produce that we're getting from Southern California, et cetera, et cetera. So it's out of what is actually local, and it's hard to think about logistics and what the chef is ordering, because sometimes we do partner with certain farms nearby, which is what we highlight on the menu and when we actually mention a farm on a dish.
Can you go double click on that partnership? What does it look like?
It's not exactly a partnership. It's just like seasonality brings us to certain farms we come back to every year. But most of the produce is what is available from certain purveyors, which is a little bit more mass market. Like we get our tomatoes from anywhere, but then a certain part of the year, we go to a certain farm for those.
Is there a way you measure sustainability? Like, okay, this is the amount of waste our restaurant is doing. The beverage waste is this much.
It seems like the waste for the restaurant's very similar all the time. What they're getting in for the food is a lot of cardboard. Honestly, I'm breaking down cardboard all the time with boxes. I don't necessarily need wine in wooden boxes. Very high-end stuff is often in a box, and it makes it more valuable if you are almost selling that whole box to somebody, but we don't need that kind of packaging. I love that producers are making 6-packs. I see this more and more from Europe, and even the flat 6-packs are ideal for stacking.
Good to know.
So I think it's hard to change wine and food. I think in packaging is there's only so much you can do, and producers have been diving into corks, non-corks, and what they're shipping these things in. Bottles have not changed for a long time, and that's, I think, a good thing, because we've created these whole storage systems, cellars, to fit certain bottles. And believe me, big champagne and Burgundy bottles can take up a lot more space at times, but we're really not going beyond that. Now we have another producer that's just a small producer from Burgundy. This is Pierre Guillemot, kind of at the bottom of the hill of Corton. Savigny-le-Beaune is a great village right outside of Beaune. Now this is a small producer that is from this village. Very simple, old school labeling. They do have a sustainability label on the back, but no one would even know that. And that's actually, why would you really even show the back of a label to the guest anyway? You're kind of showing the front, and you're telling the story. They only have a few plots to work with, and so how they manage their vines, making the best fruit possible, is important. Very low intervention, very clean winemaking. Their whole property and vineyards that they use are sustainable. A very old school way to making wine as well. And that's very possible, but you got to understand this is a very small estate. So it's hard to kind of see these. I think just telling people that it's a sustainable product, just that alone is kind of great.
What other thing, like brainstorming, if we do here, some other nice marketing joint activities, like something in my mind just came, whereas what if I was a winemaker, a wine brand, and I told you, all right, your slow day Monday, maybe I come here with my winemaker and we do a nice sustainable event where we educate your guests, we educate your staff about sustainability, about this whole thing, about the progress that is happening in the industry. Any other?
Absolutely. Honestly, high-end restaurants like this, there are many restaurants like this, that happens all the time.
Okay.
And it's really kind of a time management issue if we have time to do it. A lot of purveyors are busy making deliveries, but we can often schedule things where they come in and tell us about a product. They tell us about, it could be meats to vegetables, and even wine as well.
But I've not seen much a producer really just doing a training on sustainability.
It takes time. And what kind of influence is that? You're influencing one restaurant, one person, but then you have to do it over and over and over. And what you're doing is you're coming in to do education. You educate a staff. That staff then spreads that information to their guest. And so it's a really kind of a trickle effect. That's happening in the vineyards too. It's, as I was saying, the neighbors you go organic, the neighbors will go organic. And then it takes time and generations. And when you have information for staff to relay to their customers, their guests, that goes the same way. It's just we're always thinking so quickly that we don't realize this is not generational, but this is a long-term conversation to change people's minds or to change practices in packaging and farming and production. This stuff doesn't happen overnight.
Let's go on the consumer shift, which is happening, right? I think Gen Z versus millennials, or less people drinking wine, especially, or even alcohol. How does sustainability come in or can help? Or maybe do you think, how we have non-alcoholic list these days. We can have a sustainable wine list. Maybe that can help them.
Yeah, I think sustainable wine list is an interesting idea, but even like a wine list like myself, which I feel is a very classic wine list, we are presenting these wines in region in a way that like highlights vineyards. So it doesn't really help us to have a separate section to say these are sustainable and then these other ones are not, because it's really a conversation because they're all sprinkled in and they're actually everywhere. It's like, when was Burgundy not natural? You know, it's an interesting conversation. So it's interesting. Wine and beverage is often something you get into as you age. And so to talk quickly about Gen Z and saying they're not drinking as much, I mean, that could be true, but honestly, I don't think we should kind of jump at that and get too worried. I mean, I started in wine maybe 10 or so years ago, and I even took marketing classes in wine, and we saw that millennials were the highest consumers ever of wine, and now we have a different conversation 10 years later saying Gen Zs are not consuming as much as we thought. You got to realize, like, these Gen Zers are 20, 25 years old, etc. Give them time. They're trying to figure out what they're trying to do professionally. They're trying to, you know, I find that the more income you're making and where you're working, it does influence that you're starting to get into fine wine. And why is that? Because you have disposable income, you're getting older, you're around certain people. And I think it's less a conversation of Gen Z's focused on their phone and they're not out exploring as much. There was kind of a huge announcement not too long ago that said, you know, wine, no part of alcohol is safe to consume. Whereas, you know, 20 years ago we were talking about, one glass a day is going to be helpful for your heart. You know, so we're currently in a state that neither of those are correct or incorrect. It's just, you got to realize information's coming and going. 5 years from now, the information globally for consuming alcohol could change. So, and also Gen Zers might actually grow up, and they actually might be consuming the most wine as a populace in 10 years. We don't know that. So True. It's tough. It's tough to answer. I mean, honestly, non-alcoholic beverage sector is growing. Non-alcoholic wines, there's actually spectacular examples from Germany that have been doing this forever. Even locally in California, beer and wine, we're seeing non-alcoholic examples kind of grow and grow and grow. The non-alcoholic beer sector is really interesting to me, that you can have something that nearly tastes identical and delicious, and it has what we call a near beer, which is 0.5%. And then on the wine side, it's kind of hard. I think we don't need to go oversaturated in that category. You know, 10 examples maybe, you know, because ultimately you're only going to really sell one or two.
True.